audio and video, and we will get started soon. Good evening, everyone. My name is Brandon Harper. I'm the president of the American Mock Trial Association, and I'm very excited to welcome you to this online mock trial student orientation program. We are both live in a Zoom room with more than 200 of our current competitors and coaches, and we're also streaming this live on the AMTA YouTube page. In addition, we will record this meeting so that we can make it available in the future for anyone who's not able to attend tonight. We will have an opportunity at the end of the session for questions. And so for those of you in the Zoom room who have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat or to wait until the end, and we will get to your questions at that time. So tonight we're going to do quite a few things for you that I think will be helpful. We're going to talk about the basics of Zoom, what you need in terms of setting up your account, updating Zoom, preparing for the regional competitions, using breakout rooms. We'll also talk about some of the logistics of how AMTA is going to be using Zoom for competitions, and we'll talk about rules updates. But before I go on to the next slide, I want to make a few announcements. First, I want to note that we have members of our student advisory board who are here in the Zoom, and I suspect that they will be asking some questions at the end on behalf of the AMTA community. For those of you who have questions, you should feel free to drop them in the chat if you're in the Zoom. Otherwise, we will get to questions at the end of the presentation. I also want to thank the AMTA Academics Committee, in particular, Zach Mundy, for putting together this presentation, and the Student Advisory Board for their invaluable input and feedback as we prepared for this session. Regionals this year are going to be different. We have never had a full AMTA season online before. And although I know there have been a number of invitational tournaments, AMTA has hosted 2 online tournaments already. This is going to be a new undertaking for us all. And we thought it would be helpful for competitors to get a sense of what AMTA is planning and what you can expect for competition this weekend, if your team is competing this weekend, and in the future for those of you competing in subsequent weekends. So let's get started. First, what do you need to compete? We recommend that you use a computer. As I've said, we're using Zoom for all of our trials, and as you likely know, Zoom is available on computers, phones, tablets. We strongly recommend that you use your computer to access Zoom for the competition. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, it's because a lot of the features that we'll be talking about tonight are only available on a computer or are best used on a computer. Second, for reasons that I'll talk about later, we think a computer makes the most sense because it will give you the most reliable internet connection. You should also have, if you have the ability to do it, a second device on hand as a backup in case of emergencies. I know that not everyone has a second computer or a backup phone or a tablet, but if you are fortunate to be in a situation that you do have that, please plan ahead so that you have a backup device just in case something happens with your computer. Second, with respect to your camera and your microphone, you certainly can use the camera and microphone that come with your computer, but there's no rule against using an external camera or an external microphone. We simply request that you test your camera and test your microphone before the competition weekend to make sure that they're working properly and to make sure you understand how to use them. We also recommend that you have a reliable internet connection. That's the most important thing that you can do to prepare your setup for online trials. And for best results, we think that you should connect your computer directly into your router. And finally, please be patient. Things will go wrong. Online competition is different. We have spent a lot of time planning and preparing for this, but we know that the unexpected will happen. And so please be patient, bear with us, bear with your competitors, bear with your colleagues, and bear with the judges as we move through the competition. I suspect that most of the people watching us have a Zoom account already, but if you do not, there are a couple of ways that you can go about getting one. One, you can sign up for free at zoom.us/free signup. You can sign up for an account at no cost that you can then use at AMTA competition. And you should check with your school to see if competitors and students at your school have access to a Zoom account through your university. They may have set you up with an account already, and check with your school to see if that's the case. We strongly recommend that you download the Zoom desktop application. In other words, that you don't use Zoom through an internet web provider. Using the web client doesn't allow you to self-select into breakout rooms, which is something that's very important and I'll talk a little bit about later. So please download the Zoom app onto your computer. We have a link in this presentation, which we will post on our website, and you should then be able to use the full features of Zoom, including moving into breakout rooms, which is incredibly important. Zoom also has a function where you can test your system. So after you've downloaded Zoom, we recommend that you go to zoom.us/test to test the features. Here's one of the most important things that I will say tonight. Please make sure that right before your regional starts, you and everyone else on your team and everyone else who plans to be with your team during the competition weekend uses the most up-to-date version of Zoom. Zoom is constantly updating itself, almost on a weekly basis. So please make sure that right before your regional competition, you update your computer with the most recent version of Zoom. All of the AMTA representatives and AMTA volunteers are doing that. All of the AMTA judges have been instructed to do that. And this slide and the next slide show you how to make it happen. First, if you click your profile picture, there's an option to update Zoom, and you can click check for updates. When you click that button, you'll be brought to this pop-up on the left that will show you whether there is an update available. If there is, click update, and then your computer will update. If there is no update, your computer will say that you're up to date. Just make sure that you check for the most updated version of Zoom. So with respect to how regionals are going to be working on Zoom, for those of you who are competing this weekend, we have already sent your official school contact a link to the Zoom room that we'll be using this weekend. And for those of you competing in subsequent weekends, you can expect to get that link a few days before the regional tournament begins. All of the events for your regional will take place in one Zoom room. And then we will move people into breakout rooms for trials, for the tabulation meeting, for the tabulation room, and for the judges meeting. So click the link that we send you. That will be the same link that you'll use all weekend for your specific regional. It will open your Zoom app, and then you should be able to click the join meeting button. Once you get into the main room for your Zoom, the opening ceremony will take place in the main room. So on the first day of competition, click the link, hop in, and registration and opening ceremonies will take place in the main room. All of the trials will take place in breakout rooms. The tab room will be in a breakout room, and the judges meeting will also be in a breakout room. In order to join a breakout room, you have to have the most updated version of Zoom. Older versions of Zoom don't allow you to move yourself into a breakout room. And if we as volunteers have to take time to move you to the room, that can substantially delay the trial. So if you have the most updated version of Zoom, on the bottom of your screen, you should see a box that says Breakout Rooms. If you click that icon, you'll receive this pop-up, and you can then select the specific breakout room for your team. We're going to name the breakout rooms for trials using the alphabet in all of the regionals. So some trials will be in courtroom A, some trials will be in courtroom B, and so on. And so once you get your pairing, you'll be able to see which courtroom you're in, find that courtroom in the breakout room. It will also be named with the team numbers of the teams competing, and then click join, and then you'll be in your breakout room. So here are some of the basics of mock trial on Zoom. First, you must be in your assigned Zoom room by the round check-in time. The round check-in time is the captain's meeting time. We've set the captain's meeting for 1 full hour before the trial. You really should try to be in the Zoom room by that time in your individual breakout room. During trials, every attorney and witness who are part of an examination must be in separate rooms on separate cameras during their examinations. The overwhelming majority of our competitors are not in areas where they can be in the same room at the same time. And so in order to level the playing field, the AMTA board has decided that all competition elements have to take place through the Zoom. Now, I understand that some schools are allowing students to be together in one building or in one classroom, and that's fine if that's what your school allows. Just make sure that for the purposes of your examination, the attorney and the witness who are on the Zoom at the same time are in different rooms on different devices. We've received a lot of questions about, should I stand when I'm performing? Should I sit when I'm performing? And quite frankly, AMTA doesn't have a rule this year about whether you have to sit or stand when performing. And the decision whether to sit or stand during the trial and during your performances is completely up to you as a competitor and as a team. But the rules certainly do not prohibit you from asking the presiding judge for the presiding judge's preference. So if your team wants to know if the presiding judge has a preference about sitting or standing, it's up to you to decide whether you ask, but we don't have a rule that requires that you sit or stand. Judges will be instructed the same. And finally, this is really important, but we value your safety. This is a global pandemic that is still raging, and we want every competitor to follow all federal laws, state and local regulations, and school safety rules and regulations during all aspects of competition. So I'm going to talk now about some of the basics of the audio and video functions in Zoom. First, as everyone has done so well in the Zoom that we're in right now, you should mute your microphone and turn off your camera at all times unless you are directly involved in that phase of the trial, unless the judge instructs you otherwise. So if a direct examination is taking place, the only people who need to be on the screen are the attorney doing the direct examination, the attorney doing the cross-examination, the witness, and the presiding judge. Everyone else should have their audio and video muted. You can mute your audio and video by going to the lower left corner of the screen and clicking on the unmute or mute icon for video and the start video or stop video icon for video. So as I said, we have specific guidance about who should be on the screen at various times in the trial. Let's start at the beginning, at pretrial. The people who should be on the screen are one attorney from the plaintiff, one attorney from the defense team, and the presiding judge. And the other attorneys or witnesses who are introduced during pretrial may show their video as they make their appearance. We recommend that you do pretrial in gallery view so that you can see all of the participants who are on the screen at the same time. Opening statement and closing argument should be done in speaker view, which allows you through Zoom to see on the screen the person who's talking. And the people who should be on the screen during opening statement and closing argument are the attorney delivering the statement and the presiding judge. You can also have a timekeeper on the screen if you choose. Finally, for direct examination and cross-examination, the people who should be on the screen, as I mentioned, are the directing attorney, the witness, the crossing attorney, and the presiding judge, and that examination should be done in gallery view. Before the round, to make things easy, in fact, right now you can do this, you should select hide all non-video participants. That way, when you're looking at gallery view, you don't see a bunch of blank boxes with names of people who are in the Zoom meeting, but not on video. How do you do that? One, click the settings icon on the upper right corner of your Zoom. Then select Video Settings. Scroll down in the video settings and check Hide Non-Video Participants. That will automatically tell Zoom that you don't need to see on the screen any individuals who are not showing their video. The good thing about hiding non-video participants is that you can do that tonight, you can do that before the round, and that setting will stay in your Zoom ready to go when you start your trial. There's a little bit more information there about how to hide non-video participants. The second important piece, something that you can do before your round, you could do it today, is select side-by-side view, which is important when you start sharing your screen to show exhibits and demonstratives. In order to turn on side-by-side view, again, click the settings icon, then scroll down to screen share. Go down a few boxes and you'll see side-by-side mode. Check to make sure there's a check mark next to side-by-side mode. Once you're in side-by-side mode, you can see on the left-hand side of your screen the PowerPoint presentation or the demonstrative aid or the exhibit that's being shown to the judge. And on the right side of your screen should be an image of the individual who is speaking and who is performing. Between the two, there's a line that you can toggle, shown here by the black arrow in the picture, and you can move that line to the right to make the images of the speaker smaller and the image of the demonstrative larger, or you can move it to the left to shrink the demonstrative and to make the images of the speakers larger. I spoke earlier about speaker view and gallery view. It's important that you switch back and forth between pretrial, opening statements, the directs and crosses, and the closing arguments. It's very easy to change from speaker view and gallery view. First, if you click the view button in the upper right of your screen, you'll then see a drop-down that says either side-by-side gallery or side-by-side speaker. Click the one that you want, and then you've made the switch. This is an image that just shows you an example of speaker view. This is what you might see during the opening statement or the closing argument. The attorney delivering the performance is in the large screen on the bottom, and the judge would be one of the individuals at the top. Everyone else in the round should be muted with their audio and video off. During examinations, you should be in gallery view. That's the same as what we talked about with pretrial. In this example, you'll see that there's a judge, there's a directing attorney, a crossing attorney, and a witness, all on the screen at the same time for this particular examination. I will note that they are way too casually dressed for an AMTA competition, but I think this was an image from a scrimmage. So make sure that you think about proper courtroom attire, but this is what it should look like in terms of gallery view. Screen sharing is important because that's the way that you'll show demonstratives and exhibits to the judge, to the scoring judges, and to the opposing team. On the bottom of your Zoom options, there's a green button that says Share Screen. If you click the Share Screen button on the bottom of the window, you'll then be given a number of options for the window that you'd like to share, either your internet browser or a specific document or a specific program. Select the item that you want to share and then click Share. This is an example of what it should look like if you are screen sharing and you have hide non-video participants enabled and you have side-by-side view enabled. You'll see in this example, the attorney is at the top, the witness who's being examined is at the bottom, in the middle, and the judge is at the bottom. There would be a fourth attorney here for the cross-examination as well, but it doesn't appear as that person is on screen. We have specific naming conventions that we want you to use. As you know, on Zoom, you're allowed to name yourself, And so we want you to name yourself using a standard convention that all competitors will use across all AMTA tournaments, which will make things easier for the judges when they're filling out the ballots. First, for attorneys, you should name yourself with P or D, a dash, and then your first name and last name. Witnesses, P or D, a dash, and then the name of your character, and then in parentheses, your actual name. Timekeepers should be P or D dash, and then timekeeper, and everyone else who's in the room should be named simply spectator. And of course, if you'd like to have pronouns after your name, you're certainly welcome to do that, but please adhere to these naming conventions. So here's a checklist. These are things you want to make sure you do before the round, and make sure you're familiar with these items before the round. First, make sure you've updated Zoom to the latest version. Then make sure that you've hid all non-video participants. Make sure to enable side-by-side view. Make sure that you know how to mute your microphone and turn off your audio. And then make sure that you plug in your laptop. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Will Warahay, who's going to talk a little bit more about how to prepare for Zoom competition.
Thank you, Brandon. Can you hear me okay, Brandon?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to transition and talk a little bit about some timekeeping suggestions, and then we'll go through some technical difficulty suggestions and end with some of the major rule changes that AMTA has employed for online tournaments. So we'll start with timekeeping. I'll start by saying that in general and on average, most things about timekeeping have remained the same in terms of the practice. There are still 60 seconds in a minute, and none of that has changed. AMTA has changed the time limits that do apply to the competition this year. And so I would encourage you to review that rule, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as well, to make sure that you're abiding by the new time limits. In terms of the actual logistics of keeping time, each team should have a timekeeper in the Zoom that is identified, as Brandon just talked about, by the naming mechanism of either P or D and identified by timekeeper. You can, during your team's presentation, this is key, during your own team's presentation, you can choose to have your timekeeper on the screen if you want. You can also use the Zoom chat to make announcements in the chat to notify your team of any time remaining. You can feel free to do that either via everyone or via direct message to the individual who is presenting at that particular point in time. But under no circumstances should a timekeeper turn on their camera during the other team's presentation. So only during your own team's presentation should the timekeeper be on screen. Like I just talked about, you can use the Zoom chat to communicate. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this already. I can tell by the chat itself that you know how to access it and use it. So you click the chat button at the bottom of the window, and then you have a drop down there where you can suggest or pick the specific individual that you want to send a message to. You can select the recipient for the message and then make sure that you are sending a message to the intended person. That one's particularly important. Zoom sometimes can automatically change that recipient for you without noticing. So make sure that every single time before you click send on a message or press enter on your keyboard, that you're making sure you're sending it to the desired person and not necessarily to the entire meeting, or hopefully not to a judge. Also make sure that you never put your school name anywhere in the chat. As consistent with AMTA rules, we want to make sure that the judges do not know what school you're from until after the trial is over. So just make sure you don't do that. We're going to walk through some technical difficulties now and some suggestions from AMTA on how to deal with those technical difficulties. Some of this is very specific, and so we will post these slides afterwards. And of course, this video will be available. So you can go back and review it and kind of go through it a little bit more detailed if you choose to. But these are our suggestions in terms of making sure that you're planning and having the competition run smoothly for you. First and foremost, as Brandon said at the beginning, just remain calm. Technical issues are almost certainly going to occur. You want to make sure that you've planned for it and that you have a backup plan, but also don't worry. Judges, AMTA representatives, we will all understand, and we're here to work with you and work through this online format and the online environment to make it as successful as possible for everyone competing. Some common issues that we're going to go through is if your video call lags or freezes, Zoom unexpectedly closes on your computer, or you have camera and microphone issues where people can't see or hear you. No matter what issue you might face, we want you to make sure that you contact your teammates so that they can communicate the issue to the judges. This is especially important if something happens while you're a witness who's testifying, or you're an attorney who's either directing or cross-examining a witness. Make sure that you have a mechanism to communicate with your team through some sort of group message or some other, whatever you want to use, doesn't really matter. Make sure you can communicate with your team to let them know that you're working on getting reconnected to the meeting so that you can provide the judge an update. As the second thing you should do is inform the AMTA representatives of the issue so that they can keep an eye on your trial and assess whether the all lost time needs to be adjusted for your specific trial based on your technical difficulties. So first, we're going to talk about if your video call lags or freezes. The first solution is, and really the easy fix and most common thing that will fix most issues, is just close the Zoom app, let it sit for a second, and then restart it and rejoin the meeting. This fixes the majority of issues that we've seen people encounter during the competitions that we've hosted before. All of our meetings you can rejoin pretty quickly. Don't forget to, of course, send a message to your team, like I just talked about, letting them know that you're going to reconnect and join the meeting. When you re-enter the meeting, it's important that you make sure your audio and your video are muted before you rejoin the breakout room where your trial is ongoing. That way you don't disrupt whatever's occurring in the trial when you rejoin the courtroom. Solution two, if you have a slow connection, if you're connected to a Wi-Fi or wireless internet versus hardwiring, certainly like Brandon said at the beginning, our strong recommendation is that you find a way to hardwire your connection. But if you're not and you're on Wi-Fi, you should restart your router. If you don't have access to that, you can manually remove and re-add the wireless network to your device, to your computer. That also will sometimes resolve the connection issues or the speed issues that you're encountering. These steps on here will go through how exactly to do that for on a Mac. And on this next slide, we have those same steps for a Windows PC computer. Solution three, for if your computer is running slow, could be really for two reasons. The first one here is that your video settings might be set too high. So Zoom has a number of different settings that will affect the amount of internet that you're pulling, and of course the amount of speed that you need, the amount of power that you need from your computer to run the Zoom. And so you can reduce those settings. It'll reduce the pull on your computer, and sometimes that will also fix the issues that you're running into in terms of video lags or your call freezing. And so if you go into the video settings, you can reduce the quality from HD to just original ratio and turn off the adjusting for low light or touching up your appearance, things like that. That will also reduce the pull on your device. AMTA rules do not prohibit nor require use of external cameras, microphones, or headphones. So if you choose to use those, you certainly can. I know that in many of the competitions we've seen many individuals use those to make sure that their audio is of sufficient quality, that they can hear the judges, hear the witnesses' answers, or hear the attorney's questions. The next few slides, I'm going to talk about how to adjust and pre-plan for some issues that we've kind of commonly encountered with cameras and microphones. First, solution one, if you are using an externally connected device, either some sort of microphone or camera that's plugged in through a USB or Bluetooth, sometimes usually the easiest fix is to disconnect and reconnect those devices. Certainly consult the specific guidance from the device that you're using on how best to do that. But if you're using a wireless microphone or AirPods, obviously make sure they're charged before the competition, recharge them between rounds while you're eating lunch, those sorts of things to make sure they don't die on you mid-trial. On a PC, make sure that all your devices are authorized to connect with Zoom and talk to Zoom. That way you have no issues making sure that they're showing up as an option in the bottom corner of your screen when you click on the audio or camera options. On a Mac, we make sure that you have each device authorized to operate on Zoom. Because Zoom is a third-party app for Mac, sometimes you need those specific authorizations or depending on the specific security settings on your device. So these settings walk you through how to specifically authorize your camera and your microphone to talk to and work with Zoom. If your Zoom closes unexpectedly or you leave, it just dies on you unexpectedly, first, stay calm. Most commonly, make sure you've closed out of other programs or anything else, the apps that are open on your device, then reopen Zoom and try to reconnect to the meeting. You can also reduce the uses by changing the video settings like we talked about previously and just close all non-essential programs. And of course, much like Brandon talked about with making sure your Zoom app specifically is up to date, make sure your computer is up to date. Make sure your device, either Mac or Windows, is updated with all currently released software. We do understand that if you're using devices that might be provided by your school, your university, or sometimes you don't have the ability to manually update those things, I would just make sure that you're testing these out beforehand. You can, like Brandon talked about, you can create your own Zoom meeting, making sure that you have the functionality that you're going to need when it comes time for the competition. Again, like I said at the beginning, take a deep breath. Almost certainly technical issues are going to happen, and almost certainly tech issues can be solved by making sure that you're prepared and that you've planned ahead. Make sure you download the Zoom app on a backup device like Brandon talked about if you have that ability, either a smartphone or tablet, anything like that, to make sure that you have some other way to connect to the meeting in a more dire scenario if your computer or your laptop has died. Make sure you have that backup plan to the best of your ability. I'm going to change gears now and talk a little bit about new rules for online mock trial, rules that were recently passed and recently released on the AMTA website and highlighted and will be continued to highlight it over the course of this month on AMTA social media. So first, I'm going to talk about virtual backgrounds. In general, virtual backgrounds during Zoom trials are permitted, provided with kind of two caveats. They must both be consistent with AMTA rules 8.5 about demonstrative aids and rule 8.9 about invention of fact. Otherwise, you can use a virtual background. Virtual backgrounds do have to be disclosed to the other team during captain's meetings. So if any of your witnesses or attorneys, for that matter, are going to be using virtual backgrounds, those must be shown to the other team during the captain's meeting. That way, the opposing team, if they have a rule-based objection under either the demonstrative or invention of fact rule, can take that to the AMTA representative to handle those issues. As Brandon talked about earlier, the examinations must occur through the Zoom. This is covered under new rule 11.2. This means that the examination itself must occur through the Zoom, and that is the only requirement. Basically, that means that you can't set up on one screen right now where if I had a witness sitting in a chair next to me and we were standing farther back, we couldn't do the examination on this one box on this one camera. That my witness must be on a separate device in a separate room to avoid any feedback or audio issues so that the examination occurs through the Zoom. Otherwise, there are no restrictions. So you can, all 6 people in the trial can be in separate rooms, or you could have an attorney's room and a witness's room if you so chose. Of course, as Brandon talked about, making sure that you're taking appropriate precautions and following all your university and state and local guidance, since we are still in the middle of a global pandemic. But this is the AMTA rule in terms of that restriction. And of course, we trust that everyone else will abide and make sure that they're taking care of their safety. Pretrial notice of demonstrative aids. In general, this rule has not changed. This rule covers how that process will be done in the virtual format. Our regular rule is, of course, that all demonstrative aids must be disclosed during captain's meeting. So that rule still applies. Every demonstrative aid that you intend to use, regardless of whether it is in the case packet or not, must be disclosed to the other side and must be shown during the captain's meeting. Each team must give the other opposing team a meaningful opportunity to screenshot the demonstrative. If a team requests the opportunity to have a demonstrative put back up or shared so that they can review it and or screenshot it if they choose to, the team must let them do that. This is similar to what we do in regular in-person trials, where teams are allowed or must be permitted to use or make use of an opposing team's demonstratives. That same rule applies in the online format. This second bullet here goes through that process and what each team is required to do. And of course, if you have any issues with this process, that's what your AMTA representatives are there for, and they will help you decide what each team must do in accordance with new rule 11.3. 11.7 covers the new timing rules. This is what I kind of talked about earlier in talking about timekeeping. So in the online format, each team has 12 minutes total for speeches. This means your opening and your closing argument is combined for 12 minutes. So for example, if your opener talks for 8 minutes, that means your closer only has 4. If your opener talks for 5 minutes, your closer has 7. So it's just a straight 1-for-1 ratio that out of that 12 minutes. The direct and cross examinations are a total of 38 minutes. And you must provide a pre-trial designation or division of that 38 minutes between your direct examinations and your cross examinations. So you can, for your directs, you can choose anywhere from 20 to 24 minutes. You must choose whole minutes. So you can't say 23 minutes and 30 seconds. It has to be whole minutes. And you have to decide that before the trial begins. Also, this means that if you fail to use that time on direct, so for example, say you select 23 minutes for your directs and you finish your direct examinations in 20 minutes, you don't get to carry over that 3 minutes to cross. That 3 minutes is lost. So your pre-trial designation controls for both your direct and your cross-examination time. And the last major change is the all loss rule. Usually our all loss is 3 hours from when the trial starts. Due to the reductions in these times, the all loss is also proportionally reduced to 2.5 hours. So you have a total of 2.5 hours to finish your trial. The same rule still applies. You have to be finished talking within that 2.5 hours. That doesn't mean that your ballot has to be submitted or received by the tab room. It just means that your trial has to be finished within that 2.5 hour time period. So I'm going to go through some final kind of helpful reminders that are provided to us from the new AMTA Student Advisory Board. And then I'm going to go, well, I'll go through these first and we'll talk about what the next steps are going to be here. First, be on time to captain's meeting. This is very important, as I'm going to talk about here in a minute, when it comes to our new online ballot and the tournament administration system that we're going to be using this year. Make sure you're on time to give yourself enough time to go through demonstratives and go through the captain's forum specifically. Make sure your audio and video are working before the round begins. This means we encourage you to make sure you get into the Zoom that you're going to be using for your trial and test your audio and video through the Zoom to make sure it's working. A lot of times, in terms of your video specifically, if so, let's say you're a witness and you want to make sure that you're kind of centered on the screen and the lighting's okay. If you go to the bottom corner of your Zoom, and you can actually do this right now, on the video button, there's a little caret there, and you click the up on that. It'll show you the video settings, and that'll actually give you a preview from your camera of what your video looks like. So that way you can make sure you're centered and your lighting's good before you actually turn on the camera and you're on screen for the judges. If, like I talked about a few minutes ago, if any technical issues occur that delay any part of your round, make sure you let the AMTA representatives know and let them know right away. They have discretion to make sure that your trial has a meaningful opportunity to complete itself, and they'll be able to work with you through those technical issues. Lastly, make sure you keep all chat communications appropriate. You can use the private chat function to communicate with your team, but remember to never identify your school when sending a chat. And again, like I talked about before, make sure you double check who that recipient is in that to line before you click send on that message. And so, Brandon, let me ask you, do you want me to go through the other elements now, or do you want me to stop a minute for some of the Q&A, or do you want to do that all the way at the end?
Yeah, why don't you keep going, Will, and we'll get to the Q&A.
Okay. So I'm going to shift gears now and change from this presentation. And I'm going to talk about the new Timekeeper sheet that is posted on the AMTA website, as well as the new character evidence form, just to show you where those are and how those work. So if you go to the rules and forms page on the AMTA website under resources, I'll bring you to this page. At the bottom here, you'll see we've added a link to an online Timekeeper sheet, and the character evidence form is still there. It's just been updated a little bit. So the character evidence form now is fillable. So you can actually click and type in the witnesses here that you're going to be offering character evidence about. You can type in the attorney's names. That way you have this fillable PDF to screen share in pretrial to give the judges the pretrial notice of the character evidence form. The other thing that's linked there, if you click that link for the online Timekeeper sheet, it'll bring you to this page. This is kind of a dynamic Google form, Google sheet. It's kind of simple, but you type in up here how much time that your pretrial designations, and it will autofill these times for you. And then you can type in here, let's say that they spent 4 minutes on the opening, and then we'll automatically reduce and show you the 8 minutes for the closing down here. Same for the rebuttal. It'll do the same thing for the directs and crosses for each of the witnesses here. So to use this sheet up here, you click File and click Make a Copy. That'll turn this document into one of your documents on your own Google Drive, and then you can use it and share it with your teams during trial. We found that this is pretty useful, so that way this can be shared with your teammates. That way all of you can have this pulled up on the side if you want to, and everyone can know in real time how much time they have left after each element of the trial concludes. Next, I'm going to walk through the tournament administration system. So this is going to be the first kind of unveiling of this to the AMTA community as I walk through a lot of the functionality here and show you how our system is going to work. We do want to start by kind of publicly thanking the kind of individual who's responsible for building this for us. Professor Kent Stressman from the Santa Clara University School of Law spent an inordinate amount of time helping work with the American Mock Trial Association to build this system for us. We're pretty happy about it. We're pretty impressed by it, and we expect that you will be too, to help smoothly administer our tournaments and the ballots and the scores. So I'm going to walk through here kind of the steps of the process and how it will work from the team perspective, and show you how you get your results after rounds are completed. So what you're looking at here is kind of your team landing page. This is where the majority of the captains and things like that will live during the course of the weekend. And I will talk in a second. There's going to be questions here about how you access this. I'll address that at the end. But we'll start just by showing you how it works. So this is kind of your landing page. So after the AMTA reps input the pairings into the system, it'll populate here. It'll show you that you're in courtroom C. This is team 1081's landing page, and they're going against team 1101 in the first round. Once the pairing is input, you'll have a link here for your captain's meeting form. This will only be available to the plaintiff team. And so if you were the defense team, if we were on team 1101's page, it would show that the captain's meeting form is available to the plaintiff team. So the plaintiff team will click this and it'll open the captain's meeting form for them. Once it's open, they should share their screen, kind of like I'm doing right now with the opposing captain, and it'll walk through the form. So at first you'll pick, you'll select which liability theory you're choosing, whether or not you're exercising priority over the expert witnesses, which will populate your witness selection. It'll tell you that the call order for battery, it'll tell you that each side must call the expert if that's what's selected above. And then you'll enter the witnesses down in this section. So this is really important. When you're entering these witnesses, they must be entered in call order, meaning the order in which they will appear in the trial. Really think of this as the virtual way of filling out the ballots before the round, like we do in person. That's what you're doing here. So you select which witness is being called first, and then you'd select the team member on your team who's playing that witness. These will auto-populate with the rosters that you provided us before the tournament, and you'll be able to select the team members on your team who are playing that witness. So these can be entered in any order. So for example, if the plaintiff team, the first two calls might be the third witness that you're calling, you can put that down here if you choose to. It doesn't really matter which order you enter them, as long as which order they're input, as long as the order that once you're done is the order that they will appear in the trial. Same thing with defense. You'll input your witnesses down here, select the team numbers that are portraying those witnesses. Your next section is you're going to go through and pick the attorney roles. So you'll pick who the attorney is that's doing the openings for each side, 3 directs, 3 crosses for those corresponding witnesses, 3 crosses, 3 directs for those 3 witnesses, and then the attorney who's doing the closing argument. So you'll fill all this out. Again, think of this as the virtual way of filling out the ballot like we do in person. Here you'll select the pronouns for the witnesses in the trial. So we've pre-populated some options for you, but these are totally editable. So if you choose to, you can re-edit them that way to make sure the pronouns are correct for the individual who is portraying the witness. You'll fill out each one of these according to the rules on the captain's meeting form provided by the case. Down here is where you'll select your time designations, like I talked about a few minutes ago. So you'll announce what your time designation is for the plaintiff, what your time designation is for the defense. It walks you through making sure that you share any exhibits or demonstratives with the opposing team. And then you are going to make sure you double check and affirm that everything is entered correctly here so that it appears correctly on the judge's ballot. And then you'll click submit. Once the form is submitted, a summary of the responses will be immediately available to both teams. So back on this page, it'll show that the form has been completed and you can click to see responses. This will be available to both teams immediately upon submission of the form, both the plaintiff and defense team. So if you were to click this, it'll open this page and it'll show you a quick summary of the responses. This link will be shareable. So you can take this link and put it in your team's group chat. You can put it in the Zoom chat and share it with everyone in the trial. That way everyone has access on your team, has access to the information, can remember that Harper Martini is he, him, or she, her, and so on. This is the ballot. Obviously, this will be only shown to the judges, but I'm just going to walk you guys through it just so you know what they're looking at and how they're filling it out. So after you've completed these forms, that will populate this ballot for the judges. So the judge will open the ballot. They will type in their name. They will confirm the team numbers who are in the trial to make sure they have the correct ballot. And this walks them through the trial. So they'll be able to enter the feedback for the opening statement. You'll see how it populates the name of the student who's giving the opening statement for each side. So they have that available to them. Walks through each of the witnesses in the trial, and they can fill in that feedback and either show or hide it to make sure it's not that long on the screen. They'll import their scores at the bottom, our scale 1 to 10, or if it does not occur, they have that option. And at the bottom, they'll be able to rank the outstanding attorneys and witnesses. This will be dynamic and is connected to the captain's meeting form that you're filling out. So they will only have here the 6 attorneys who were in the trial. It'll show the side that they competed on, and it will also show the witnesses, their real name, and of course the name that they played in the trial. And then the judge will click submit once the trial is over. Once the ballot is submitted and reviewed, added, tabulated, and released by the AMTA reps, it will populate to, sorry, let me walk through this real quick. It'll populate to your sheet. It'll come up on the team page. So it'll show up here. This is what the ballots for round 2 will show. Now, to be clear, this will only show to the individuals that each team has identified that should have ballot access. And so before your tournament, each team will get 2 emails. One email will be providing captain access, and the second email with a separate link will be for ballot access. So this won't necessarily populate for everyone who's accessing the system. But for those that have that permission, they will see the results from the trial, and you'll immediately be able to see what the point totals were, whether you won or lost the ballot, and it'll give you the links to open up and view your scores and view your feedback, which is what I was showing here a second ago. So obviously this judge didn't type any comments, but if they did, they'd be populating here. And this would populate your scores and show you how you did, show you what the totals were for your trial. And with that, I think that's all I had. And Brandon, I will turn it back over to you for some questions.
Thanks very much, Will. I do see that we have some questions in the chat. We'll get to those. I think that we also have members of our student advisory board on the Zoom. So I will first ask whether there are members of the student advisory board who would like to ask any questions.
Hi, Brandon. I would love to kick us off.
Sure, go
Um,
ahead, Megan.
Hi, I'm Megan. I'm a competitor for Northwestern mock trial and also a member of the Student Advisory Board. I really loved all of the tips for handling technical difficulties. One question I was wondering is if you have a situation where someone doesn't have a backup device or their connection goes out unexpectedly and it's going to take them a while to get back on the call, should you try to go ahead with the trial or pause right there until the person can get back on?
That's a really good question. If it's a person who is participating in the trial or will be imminently participating in the trial, my recommendation is to immediately tell the AMTA representatives. We had a meeting with our AMTA representatives on Sunday, a very long and detailed meeting where we stressed that AMTA's view is that things are going to go wrong. Zoom will act up, there will be power outages and internet shortages, and our AMTA representatives are willing and able to be accommodating and reasonable where it's possible to do that. So the first thing you should do is reach out to the AMTA representatives, and they will help you go from there. Thanks, Megan. Any other students from the Student Advisory Board who have questions that they'd like to ask, feel free to unmute your video and join us. Hey, Travis.
Hey, Brandon. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was really great. My name's Travis. I'm a competitor on Harvard Mock Trial and a member of the Student Advisory Board. And I actually have a question about spectating and scouting per chance. There might have been some rule changes this year, and obviously spectating and scouting is a lot easier in the online format. So what are the rules for scouting this year, and have they changed anyway in terms of previous years in light of the online format?
That's a good question, Travis. The scouting rules for regionals have not changed. So to the extent that you decide that you want to move into another room at your tournament to scout, the rules do not prohibit that. We would simply request that, as you would if you were in person, you please be respectful. And to the extent that someone asks who you are, be courteous when interacting with the teams in the room. Make sure to mute your video and mute your audio. Make sure to be appropriate in the chat. AMTA's rules about regionals scouting have not changed because of the online format, but everyone is expected to maintain the professional decorum that we always expect at our tournaments.
Thank you.
I also had a question. I'm Ria. I'm a competitor for Emory. I'm also a member of the Student Advisory Board. Great presentation. It was really, really helpful. You mentioned screen sharing exhibits, and we've been screen sharing exhibits and demos, for most of the year at invites and things like that. I was just wondering if for regionals or any AMTA tournaments, AMTA had any sort of restrictions on the kind of software you're supposed to be using to create demos or display exhibits or anything like that. Is it just limited to PowerPoint? Are you allowed to kind of use other things like Prezi, things like that? But that was my question.
Thanks, Ria. I'm going to let Will answer this question. I didn't introduce Will beforehand, which was my mistake. Will is AMTA's most immediate past president. He's also a coach of a team. He's a member of the executive committee. And importantly for this question, he's been sort of the point person on a lot of the technical issues that we've been working through for online competition. So Will, I think you're the appropriate person for this one.
Sure. And so, yeah, I agree with you, Rio. We've seen a lot of different people use different things over the course of the season. AMTA has no limitation on the type of technology that you want to use. So you can use PowerPoint, you can use Canva, slides, whatever you want to use. And really, there's no limitation. This is similar to our normal rules where demonstratives are not limited in the form or type that they can take, of course, subject to AMTA's regular rules about demonstrative aids. Which is rule 8.5. That rule still applies, but in terms of the technology that you can use, the sky's the limit. You can use whatever you want.
Thank you.
Thanks. Serena?
Hi, everybody. My name's Serena. I go to Colby College, and I'm also a member of the Student Advisory Board. And I first just want to thank you for this awesome presentation. It was really informative. But I just had a question about whether AMTA has implemented a way to report discrimination, if there is any, or a way to evaluate judges online.
Thanks for that question, Serena. So at round 4 of the competition, you will be emailed by your AMTA representatives and sent through the GroupMe a link to the tournament evaluation. And we have made some changes to the tournament evaluation so that it is focused on online competition. We will ask you to rate and describe the judging in all 4 of your rounds. You should be candid with us about your judging experiences on that evaluation, because we will use it to make decisions about future competitions, about potential changes to rules, about decisions about who hosts for AMTA in the future, who judges for AMTA in the future. And so any student who has feedback about judging or anything else about the competition should use the feedback form that they will receive during round 4, and that must be submitted in order to receive your ballots after the competition.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I saw one comment on YouTube that I want to address because I'm sure a lot of people have this question. The comment was, how do I communicate with my team if I want to during the trial or between the breaks? And the answer is, for this year, and this year only because we're online, you can use whatever electronic medium you need to communicate. If you want to set up a Slack channel with your team to communicate, you can. If you want to set up a GroupMe or talk on iMessage or a group text, that's fine. I know some teams have been using FaceTime meetings during the breaks. That's not prohibited. If you want to set up a separate Zoom for your team, you could do that too. So it's completely up to you how you decide to communicate. The only thing that I'll say is that if you do communicate with each other in the chat, understand that the chat can be public and that the host of the Zoom meeting can download the chat at the end. So please make sure that you are appropriate in your comments, as Will mentioned. I see a question in the chat. Will there be a separate info session for host teams? There won't be a dedicated info session for host teams, but the hosts will be receiving a contact by the AMTA representatives well in advance of your competition. And the AMTA representatives will walk you through anything that you as a host need to know about the responsibilities for the weekend. There's a question, are there restrictions on which team members can communicate during the trial? That rule hasn't changed. The rule about communication is the same, which is the people who may communicate during the round are the people who are on the roster. So all of the rostered competitors for your team may communicate with the other rostered competitors for your team. You may also communicate with the rostered competitors of the other team and with the judges, but you may not communicate with any family members or friends or spectators or other people who are not on the roster. That rule has remained unchanged. There's a question in the chat, how many rounds will there be each day? That depends on the particular weekend of competition. For those of you that are competing this weekend only, you will have 1 round on Friday evening, 2 rounds on Saturday, and 1 round on Sunday morning/afternoon, depending on your time zone. We sent you your schedule in an email this week, and the schedules have been posted on the AMTA website for quite some time. The website that lists your team assignments also lists your schedules. Make sure that you check the schedules so that you know when you're competing. For everyone who's competing in weekends 2, 3, and 4, your opening ceremony is Friday evening, and then you have 2 rounds on Saturday, 2 rounds on Sunday, and your award ceremony is later in the day on Sunday.
I'll just add something and highlight there, Brandon, that the schedules, to make sure that you're appropriately adjusting the schedules for your time zone. The schedules on the AMTA website and they're being sent out are all in Eastern time zone. So just make sure you're adjusting that if you are not in the Eastern time zone.
There's a question in the chat about what happens if a school instructs students to go home or switch to online learning. And the answer is, that's one of the benefits of the fact that we're doing this virtually. Your experience as a competitor shouldn't change whether you're doing it at school or at home. As long as you have a computer and you can get into Zoom, you should be able to compete. So no one should be forced to withdraw from competition if their school says that they have to move to virtual learning. That's the reason that we decided, among others, to have these virtual competitions. I
And,
see a question about, oh, sorry, go ahead, Will.
Sorry, I was going to answer that one. With the question in the chat about when and how will the captains be given access to the Spirit of AMTA form, that will be sent through the GroupMe from the AMTA representatives at the appropriate time. It'll be an online form that'll be provided to you that you'll need to fill out before round 4 begins.
I see that we're also now joined by Missy Watt, who is the chair of our tournament administration committee and a member of the AMTA board. All of the competitors and hosts have received a lot of emails from Missy over the last several months. She is quite literally in charge of running all 32 regional competitions, all 8 orcs, and the national championship. And so, Missy, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I was just going to, I'm sorry I couldn't be here sooner. I was just going to add to that question that if you run into trouble, you should, with having to go online unexpectedly or changes from your school, if it's close in time to the tournament, then you should reach out to your AMTA representatives first, and feel free to copy me or reach out to me. My email address is amta.tournaments@collegemocktrial.org, or it's on the website. I'm happy to help coordinate and try to accommodate you the best that we can.
There's a question, what is the page that links to the captain's meeting form? As Will said, all of the captains, the people identified by your team as captains, will receive a link later this week so that they can access the captain's meeting form. Will, we have a question about virtual backgrounds. I'll throw that one over to you since you went over the rules.
Yep. Rule 11.1, I believe, my memory serves, allows virtual backgrounds. That's a simple answer.
Any other questions? We're happy to stick around to continue answering questions. We know that this year is different in a number of respects, but thankfully it's going to be the same in a lot of respects. Most of the AMTA rules are the same. Most of what you can expect from a competition will be the same. And we've tried to highlight in our rule book the major changes for the year. So I hope that as you are preparing for regionals, you review this presentation. We will post it on our website. We'll also make a video of this presentation available for any people who weren't able to join us tonight. And we will stick around to answer questions as long as you have them.
Hey, Maria. Yes, your question for communication in rounds, can witnesses communicate with attorneys during trial or only during breaks? Yeah, as long as everyone is on a roster, they are permitted to communicate with each other while the trial is going on. There's no restriction on whether or not that communication can occur only during breaks.
I received a private question, but I want to answer it publicly. It's, will the judges have access to the stipulations or will those need to be screen shared? We will be sending the judges information about the case in advance, but you should certainly be prepared if you want to bring the judge's attention to any specific document to show the judge that document via screen share. If you have additional questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. We're glad that we were able to do this. Hopefully it answered a lot of your questions. Hopefully you're excited and ready for regionals. I know we're all very excited for this weekend and the following weekends. So if you have no more questions, thank you so much. Hope you have a great night. And if there are additional questions, please feel free to stick around.